Today, we kick off a 3-day, 180-mile off-road adventure through the rugged and remote desert of Kofa National Wildlife Refuge in southwestern Arizona. We'll traverse a variety of trails from the far southern stretches of the Castle Dome Mountains through the expansive King Valley, up and around the Kofa Mountains into the northern end of the range. Along the way, a variety of points of interest would offer glimpses of the past and teach us about life in this harsh desert landscape. The abandoned structures of the Big Eye Mine, the well-preserved boomtown of Polaris, the namesake for the region, the King of Arizona Mine, Palm Canyon, Kofa Cabin, Crystal Hill, and a mining museum would all be stops on our journey. The captivating scenery along every mile, some incredible campsites, and memorable moments would make this an epic adventure. This is the Kofa Special. Hello everybody and welcome to another AZ Off-Road Special. My name is Scotty. This is Megan. We are out here today in Kofa National Wildlife Refuge between Quartzsite and Yuma on a 3-day, 3-night adventure through this beautiful area.
I'm excited to be here and help out being the food and beverage manager, so look out for some mystery beers that he gets to try.
Yes, gotten the promotion, official co-pilot. Sorry Daniel, you just live too far away. And she's a little bit cuter.
All right, now we're going to take a look at the map of where we'll be going for today.
To put where in Arizona we are into perspective, Kofa National Wildlife Refuge is a large swath of land in the western part of the state, located between Quartzsite and Yuma. At over 665,000 acres in size, it can be hard to comprehend just how much land is part of Kofa. To put things into something easier to understand, the 1,040 square miles of Kofa is just a little smaller than the entire state of Rhode Island. While I've ventured into the periphery of Kofa before on several past trips, some more recently than others, the goal of this adventure would be to take a much deeper dive into what this space offers. And our 3-day, 3-night route would accomplish that. After making the drive from Phoenix and camping out in the southwestern part of Kofa last night, we would kick off our trip by pushing deeper into the southern end of Kofa. On this spur trail, we would head into the rugged landscape through the heart of Kofa Wilderness. We would navigate our way on a series of back roads and bypasses northwards into the Castle Dome Mountains. After clearing the mountains, we would enter the vast openness of the King Valley. We would cut clear across the valley into the heart of Kofa and towards the Kofa Mountains. Once more, we would backtrack, this time through the King Valley, all the way back to Highway 95, which we would briefly use to reposition ourselves slightly more north. From there, we would camp near the scenic Kofa Queen Canyon before trekking further inwards towards Palm Canyon, which we would explore on foot. We would again move north to one of the few major dirt roads through the region. This time, we would travel it in its entirety, cutting all the way across Kofa, making a few more stops on our final push through this massive region. In total, it would be about 180 miles on dirt, several more on foot, and about 450 miles in total over the course of our 3 days. Anyways, so that's the route we're going on. Before we get started here, because we camped here last night, we got a jump start on the trip, so that way we can get started on Big Eye Mine Trail right away. Gonna go ahead and get aired down, tell you real quick about some changes to the Jeep, and then we will officially get this trip underway. So, you ready?
Ready.
After getting our previous night's quick camp cleaned up, it was on to getting ready for the trail, which meant airing down the tires to a more comfortable pressure. From this point, we wouldn't see pavement again until tomorrow afternoon. Since our last special, the Jeep really hasn't changed that much. I now have a nice crack in my windshield, I installed a new oversized cup holder inside, and my left rear door that I've struggled with for years finally gave up and was now inoperable until I fixed it. Other than those upgrades and downgrades, the Jeep sits the same, and has been holding up to whatever I throw at it. For this trip, I would be carrying some extra supplies, including additional gas for our extended desert stretches that would have no planned resupply points along our entire route. Now that all the important things were established, it was time to get underway on the adventure. We pulled out of our camping spot and proceeded south on the trail. It was really nice starting day one of our trip right on the trail. It meant we could get an early start and not have to cover a long highway stretch to get here, which saved a lot of daylight time for other activities. The trail remained pretty well maintained as we passed several large open flat areas, and the Castle Dome Mountains rose up to our left. These large, flat areas of volcanic rock almost looked like pavement, disrupted only with occasional vegetation, washes, and tire tracks. This section of trail to our first stop would be a little over 15 miles. It would get progressively less traveled and more difficult as we went along, but for right now, things remained easygoing. There were a few wash crossings and rockier areas to navigate, but nothing remotely difficult. The view opened up as we continued south. We soon came to a large clearing, which marked the site of the Lincoln Mine, also known as La Colorado Mine, a small lead, silver, and feldspar mine that was worked in the late 1800s into the early 1900s. A few small shafts remained near the road. This was just a small operation in the Castle Dome mining district, which features about 80 different mines spread throughout this southern stretch of Kofa. We had our sights set on a much more historic and productive mine, so we continued on. As the trail turned to the east, we marveled at the ever-evolving desert view out our windows. This time of year, everything was particularly green. The cacti, shrubs, and wild grass had all come alive from some good winter rain, and sharply contrasted the red, brown, and orange shades of rocks that made up the mountains. Our pace was slower in places as the surface became rockier and featured a few more washouts. The bumpy road was now surrounded on both sides by designated wilderness. While all of Kofa is National Wildlife Federal land managed by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, about 82% of the land is also wilderness, making it the second largest in Arizona. Slower going sections would be followed by smooth sections, which allowed us to cruise around 30 miles an hour and make good time. While we were continuing to push deeper into the rugged landscape, the distinctive Thumb Butte came into view straight ahead.
But who had to come do that? You know it was like...
The trail was a roller coaster as it twisted and turned and climbed in and out of washes as we continued eastward. There were even a few puddles remaining from a recent rain. After 10 miles, the trail dips into a wash and becomes the slowest going yet. This section is pretty washed out and has a few off-camber dips to navigate. This required us to slow to a crawl, as there is really only one line through this section. The Jeep continued over the terrain with minimal complaining, and we were soon back to easy trail. As we pushed further east, alternating sections of hard-packed dirt and longer stretches in the sandy wash bottoms greeted us. Thumb Butte grew ever closer as we began to circle around the backside of it. The trail narrowed and the vegetation grew more abundant. Eventually, the road turned north and entered a wash, which we would follow for most of the way to our next stop. Some desert pinstriping isn't uncommon through this stretch. The road surface remained manageable, and the hallmark rugged mountains of Kofa grew taller and taller as we pushed on. It seemed like the Jeep was just being swallowed by the terrain as we headed further along the trail. We completed one more tight wash section before we ran out of road. This was the end of the line here in the southern reaches of Kofa, but meant we had reached a short hiking trail that would take us to the historic Big Eye Mine. We parked the Jeep in a small parking area and got out to stretch our legs. We were the only ones here at this point. We traded the tires for hiking boots and set up the old mining access road. From where we parked, it would be about half a mile to get to the buildings of the Big Eye Mine, and another quarter mile past that to get to the tunnels. We trekked uphill, following the dilapidated road deeper into the mountains. The temperature was in the mid-70s, which was lovely, but with our gear on and being exposed to the late morning sun as we hiked uphill, it felt a bit warm. The road we were on is normally gated off, but we did find the gate open. The condition of the road, however, meant it was best conquered on foot. We enjoyed the views and found a few traces of prospecting along the way. As we crested the hill, the main cabin and other remnants came into view. We had made it to the Big Eye Mine. The Big Eye, according to the limited history published about it, appears to have begun with one man, named William Miller. Miller came to the Castle Dome area in around 1870, shortly following the creation and boom of the mining district just a few years earlier. Miller was an entrepreneur and bought mines in the area and worked to build a wagon business at Castle Dome Landing. Allegedly, in his free time, he also prospected, and that is how he came across the rich gold vein that started the Big Eye Mine. By about 1910, more established and fruitful work took place here at the mine. The Big Eye Mining and Milling Company was established at some point after this time and operated the mine while ownership was split 4 ways. Work and development continued intermittently through 1951. Primarily a gold and silver mine, the Big Eye produced 2,370 tons of ore, which averaged about 0.9 ounces of gold per ton and 8 ounces of silver per ton. lesser amounts of copper and lead were also found. Ore from the mine would have been sorted on site, then hauled out via truck 20 miles south to the railhead in Roll, Arizona, and then over to El Paso for smelting. The cabin on site was used to house miners working the property and featured bunk beds, a stove, and other amenities including a shower and running water from a nearby well. Throughout the 1950s, many of the mines in the district began to play out, and despite changing ownership, not much became of this mine after that point. The localized ore vein and remote location meant the success of the Big Eye was limited and short-lived. In order to fully see what was left at the Big Eye, we continued past the cabin a short distance up the trail to the workings. After rounding the corner, the ore chute came into view amidst a pile of overburden or waste rock. The ore chute was partially collapsed, but remains mostly intact. We climbed up the pile of rock toward the main portal, where quite a bit remains. Old pipes lay on the ground, and a small shack, which houses some machinery, remains. Leading from the adit to the ore chute, built into the waste pile, is railroad ties from what would have been ore cart tracks leading directly to the chute. Scraps of rail, piping, tubing, and other remnants lay strewn all about. It's incredible to think about all the supplies that would have been brought to this hostile terrain in order to make the mine functional. And this remoteness is part of what preserves this time capsule in place. After seeing some others venture into the portal, we strapped on our lights and headed in. The main entrance to the mine was well marked with a combination of sheet metal and timbering. Immediately inside, ore cart tracks and ventilation pipes led into the darkness. Not far in, a winze plunges down to the left, deeper into the lower levels of the mine. Obviously, it's things like this that make abandoned mines hazardous, because without proper lighting and careful steps, it would only take one misstep to end your adventure. Last time I was here, this is where I turned around, but since we had plenty of lighting, we continued further in. The tunnel split, and we continued to see pieces of the structural work that was done as the miners dug deeper into the mountain, chasing the gold vein that was so valuable. We came across a particularly wet spot where groundwater and minerals had seeped through the roof of the tunnel. The tunnel was well defined and over 6 feet tall as we continued in. This type of hard rock mine, tunneled directly into the country rock that makes up the mountains, is very structurally sound, requiring little to no support timbers. Only in areas where stopes or winzes were carved out did we see any additional bracing. After exploring a couple of offshoots that ended in dead ends, we reconnected with the split tunnel we had branched off from and continued back towards the entrance. It was fascinating to see the different colored rocks, fault lines, and other anomalies deeper in the mine. Obviously, most, if not all, of the precious minerals have since been extracted. The inner workings of this mine aren't particularly lengthy here in the Big Eye, but it was a fascinating glimpse into what working conditions would have been like for those miners working here. Daylight was visible in one of the stopes, which looked high up back to the surface. We followed the ore cart tracks as they pointed us back towards the entrance, which would have been the pathway a valuable ore would have begun its long journey to the smelter with. Eventually, the light at the end of the tunnel grew brighter, and we returned back to the bright daylight of the afternoon sun. From the mine adit, we continued uphill, following an old footpath. This vantage point offered us a great view overlooking the cabin, some of the workings, and some of the more rugged terrain that surrounded us here deep in the Kofa wilderness. Once again, we were amazed how people developed and worked in this kind of terrain. We continued along this new way back to the cabin, following in the footsteps of those miners commuting to and from work.
Not an issue.
Surrounding the cabin, several water tanks, piping, and other piles of wood from other former structures remained. The cabin itself remains in good condition. Outside is a sign talking about the history, and a table which features artifacts found in the area, alluding to the rich history here. Inside the cabin, which according to the signs is available for visitors wishing to stay the night, are some old beds, more mining relics, and a logbook. The long record of visitors indicate the long list of people who have made the trek out to learn about the past and see the Big Eye. After some careful scanning, I found a familiar name in the book.
Oh, hey. I know that guy.
We added our latest visit to the logbook. A stove remains in the kitchen, which has at least partially collapsed recently. It can be hard to imagine living in a remote place like this, with limited amenities, but this tour of the building certainly gave us a greater understanding of what life was like here at the Big Eye Mine. We chatted with some other visitors, some of which were former Alaskan gold miners, before we had seen everything this stop had to offer. After exploring for about an hour and a half, we set out on the hike back to the parking area, having learned a lot about this relic from the past. It didn't take long, and we were soon back to the Jeep, where Megan, my self-appointed new food and beverage manager, began working on making lunch. We enjoyed a delicious and refreshing bagel sandwich, which really hit the spot as we sat in the afternoon sun. It was lunch with a view. After refilling the food tanks, we were back on the move. We now had to retrace the 16 miles of trail back the way we came to get to our next stop and move forward with our itinerary. We headed back out of the narrow canyon, following the wash as it headed out from the tall, rugged mountains that were surrounding us. The miles rolled by quickly. We once again came to Thumb Butte, which is also the most reasonable namesake for how the Big Eye Mine got its name. Apparently, the notch on the butte is referred to as the Big Eye. As we continued along and enjoyed the view of this unique region of the state, we wondered, what is the history behind Kofa itself? Why was a national wildlife refuge established here specifically? And the answer was fascinating. The history of Kofa begins in 1936. It was the Arizona Boy Scouts of all people who led the charge. After co-founder of the Scouts, Major Frederick Burnham, a conservationist, noted that less than 150 bighorn sheep remained in this section of Arizona, the Scouts decided something needed to be done to keep the bighorn from going extinct. Because they were hunted excessively and subject to diseases from domestic livestock, President FDR signed a proclamation establishing the Kofa Game Range and nearby Cabeza Prieta in an effort to preserve the habitat where these animals thrived. The gentle foothills and rugged mountains play host to a wide range of wildlife in this thriving, humid desert region of the larger Sonoran Desert as a whole, including the elusive bighorn sheep. The Civilian Conservation Corps set up a work camp and built water holes for the bighorn, and Kofa was dedicated in April of 1939. It was later combined with BLM land and renamed to the Kofa National Wildlife Refuge. The population of bighorn here in Kofa has jumped to over 420, and as a species, they have rebounded in a big way, now labeled as apparently secure instead of on the path to extinction. And that's how Kofa came to be, and continues to be, a sanctuary for preserving Sonoran Desert wildlife and providing visitors with a unique glimpse into the variety of rugged life that calls this area home. The drive out was enjoyable and easygoing. Since we were in a national wildlife refuge, I wasn't able to fly my drone, so I had to resort to a camera on a long monopod to get some sweeping landscape shots. It wasn't quite the same, but the views remained good. We climbed back through the rough section as we crawled over some exposed rock and navigated a few nice washouts. After this, we were back to the smoother trail, and making great time as we headed back north. We eventually passed our campsite, and soon found ourselves at Castle Dome Road, where we turned right. Our next stop was just up the road, and we turned into the parking lot shortly after. After paying the entry fee, which was $20 per person, we made it into the Castle Dome Mine Museum. Featuring a collection of historic buildings that were already on site and also relocated from surrounding mines, we walked around the town. Castle Dome City was the main outpost and a hive of activity as the district boomed. The inside of the buildings featured a wide range of artifacts. Some were collections of items found in the nearby area in a sort of museum display. Others, such as the blacksmith shop, mercantile, and saloon, were set up in period display, looking much like they would have when the streets were full of miners and businessmen roaming around. Because it was late in the afternoon, we had a limited amount of time to see the whole museum, which could easily take several hours. We headed across the road into the outside exhibits, which featured some of the original shafts and a collection of other structures from the area where active mining took place. The Castle Dome mining district has been worked for several hundred years. The first Spanish and French explorers who passed through this area in the 1400s noted and worked mineral deposits in the surrounding mountains. By the 1850s, the area was occasionally prospected, but still considered very hostile due to the presence of Native Americans living in and defending this area. With the creation of Fort Yuma nearby, military presence allowed prospectors from the gold rush to venture east across the Colorado River into this rich region. Mining activity really took off after 1869, a few years after the creation of the mining district. A small tent camp was set up at Castle Dome, and as capital and riches poured in, the town built up, featuring a stagecoach stop, saloons, and all kinds of other amenities. Castle Dome was noted for its high-grade silver ore, which it produced nearly 500,000 ounces of over its lifetime. 2,000 ounces of gold and 10,000 tons of lead was also found as part of the ongoing mining effort, in addition to other precious metals and placer gold found before hard rock mining took off. Mining activity resurged during the World Wars as the demand for lead ore was high. Following the plunge of silver prices and the fall-off of high-grade ore, Castle Dome was all but dead by 1980.
Alright, see you later.
It was worth the stop to check out the museum and learn more about the history of the area. But since they were now closed, it was time to continue moving northbound. However, the main road that tracks north through the Castle Dome Mountains was now closed in this section, which is new since my last visit. Because of this, we would have to backtrack a little ways toward Highway 95 and take a new bypass route created by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that bypasses the private property surrounding the Castle Dome Museum and reconnects with the main trail a few miles north. This bypass route was well signed, and we followed it as it meandered through several wash crossings and large stretches of desert pavement, which are the large open areas covered by volcanic rocks. The two-track trail turned east and gave us a stunning view of Castle Dome Peak and the surrounding mountains up ahead. The trail was easygoing and quiet, and we had the whole thing to ourselves. The view continued to improve as we followed along. After navigating a few more twists and turns, we eventually rejoined the main road after a few miles. The bypass really didn't add any extra time and had been a scenic treat. We were now in the heart of the Castle Dome Mountains. After some slow and go, the rockier trail began to climb deeper into the range. We were now on the hunt for a spot to camp. There was still a little chunk of daylight remaining, but after a busy day, we were looking to get a spot and have some time to relax before the sun went down. After passing an occupied spot, one of the few people we had seen all day, we pushed on. Around the next corner, and after a brief climb, we came to the perfect clearing and pulled off. This would be camp for the night. Perched here on the western edge of the mountain range, Castle Dome Peak was directly to our east. The rest of the Castle Dome Mountains ran north and south of us, providing sharp rises in elevation that jutted out of the desert floor. It was rugged beauty at its finest. Looking west, a large valley opened up in front of us. Highway 95 bisected it somewhere, and most of the land we were looking at was part of the Yuma Proving Ground military test area. Megan got to work setting up our camp table and chairs, and then sat to relax while I got the rest of camp set up. As the daylight continued to fade, the surrounding landscape came alive in a brilliant glow. Getting to camp a little bit early meant we could sit and savor this special time of day, and anywhere we looked, there was something incredible to see. All of this, setting up camp and enjoying the view, really made us quite thirsty, and it was time to dive into the selection of mystery-themed beers Megan had picked out for this adventure.
I have some mystery beers for him to try as the new food and beverage manager. Okay, first up is one that I would like. It is this Zona Pilsner from West Brewing Company, brewed in Gilbert and Mesa, Arizona.
Okay.
What's more Arizona than a cactus? And literally the name Arizona. And so this is a Arizona-themed beer brewed in Arizona for our Arizona adventure. Hence this one. And that one's mine. It is a Pilsner. The other one up is this Nectaron Hazy IPA, one that Scott likes. Scott likes hazy IPAs. The brewery at Torito Farm. And prior to knowing this was brewed in Arizona, this is brewed in Wilcox, Arizona. I literally picked it because it looks like an Arizona sunset.
The can art is good.
So the can art is what drew me to this.
I'm so excited.
And then I learned it was brewed in Arizona, so I'm even more excited. So these are themed beers for today.
Let's say no more.
Okay, cheers.
Cheers, babe. To the new food and beverage manager. Okay, that's good.
This is light, refreshing.
Yeah, I dig that a lot.
We watched the final few minutes of daylight slip away, and as if perfectly on script, the can art of my beer was quickly portrayed in real time right before our eyes. The sky was vibrant with shades of yellow, red, and orange. High above us, the tethered aerostat radar system of the Yuma Proving Ground, which we had begun to affectionately refer to as the Goldfish, floated in the sky. It was an absolutely phenomenal display of a beautiful desert sunset. The landscape surrounding us was quiet and calm as we savored every last photon of light. Once it had gotten dark, it was of course time to start on dinner. And the streamlined kitchen setup was easy to get ready. Megan got the bread buttered and the soup simmering. Tonight would be garlicky grilled cheese and tomato basil soup. A nice, savory meal to satiate our bellies. Assembled with love and plenty of seasonings, we patiently let everything cook while the smells teased our senses. Before long, dinner was served, and we had another round of drinks to pair with this delicious-looking food. Dinner, as expected, was fantastic. Savory and delicious, and warmed us up as the cool evening air crept in. After a quick dessert, it was on to dishes and cleaning up camp before bed. While not using the water jug exactly as intended, we eventually got things put away and reset for the next day, and soon crawled into sleeping bags to head to sleep. It had been a full day, so we were tired. But it was a great start to our Kofa adventure. Tune in next time as we continue our journey through the Kofa National Wildlife Refuge. On day 2, we'll head north for the deepest part of Kofa, into the heart of the King Valley. After miles of desert trails, we'll make it to the foot of the rugged Kofa Mountains, where we'll explore a series of stops. First, the North Star Mine, a fascinating operation with well-preserved tunnels and equipment that looks like it was abandoned just yesterday. From the North Star, we'll make the short trek over to see the King of Arizona Mine and Cemetery, the namesake for this entire region. We'll see what is left today and explore this rich boomtown that was once one of the most productive regions in the state. From the King of Arizona Mine, we'll backtrack all the way to Highway 95 and then reposition ourselves north, where we'll make camp near the scenic Palm Canyon.